Osterville Village Library, and for today's First Chapter Friday, I would like to share with you a selection by the author Avi called Gold Rush Girl. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the flyleaf before we get into the first chapter. Life in 1848, Providence, Rhode Island, isn't terribly exciting for a girl like Victoria Blaisdell. Banned from going to school and forced to borrow books secretly from the library, Tori longs to live a life as adventurous and independent as her heroine, Jane Eyre. When Tori's father loses his job and becomes so desperate to restore his family fortunes that he decides to seek a share of the newly discovered gold in California, Tori is eager to control and seize her own destiny, so she stows away on the westbound ship carrying her father and her younger brother Jacob. Though San Francisco is mud-caked, frenzied, and full of wild and dangerous men, Tori quickly finds friends and independence until her father leaves for the gold fields and the care of Jacob falls to her. But when Jacob vanishes, kidnapped, perhaps hidden among the hundreds of ships called Rotten Row that have been abandoned in the bay, if he is there, Tori has to find him in a dangerous search. Chapter 1. Have you ever been struck by lightning? I have. I write not of the sparkling that bolts from the sky, but of gold, the yellow metal buried in the earth and the shatter-wit world of those who seek it. That world turned me topsy-turvy so that I did things I never dreamed that I would or could do. It began, fittingly, in a leap year, 1848. I was 13 years old. My family, father, Randolph Blaisdell, mother, Abigail Pell Blaisdell, my younger brother Jacob, and I, Victoria, most often called Tori, was residing in the smallest state in these United States, Rhode Island. We had a home in Providence, the state's major city, with its fine buildings, wealth, tranquility, and population of 40,000. Our home was 15 Sheldon Street, a modest but agreeable wooden house on the east side of town. It stood upon the hill, as it was smartly called, above commercial Wickenden Street. We had a cook and one servant, both of whom lived in our attic. Our lives were comfortable, with nothing unusual ever happening. Indeed, my early family life was untroubled, as smooth as Chinese silk. I questioned nothing, not about the world and not about myself. My entire universe was Sheldon Street, which meant I knew everyone as they knew me. As for my social life, it consisted of calling and receiving among a small group of proper neighborhood girls. As one grows up, it can take a while to understand that sometimes it's not your mother or father who have the greatest influence on your life. Thus, it was gradually that I came to realize that the person who shaped my life more than any other was my mother's older sister, Aunt Lavinia. Since these two sisters were from the distinguished Rhode Island Pell family, Lavinia already considered herself quite the queen. Then, before I was born, she married Quincy Fellows, a wealthy Pawtucket cloth factory owner, and that made her, in my mind, an empress. A tall, big woman with hanging coils of braid alongside her puffy face, which peered out from a deep, dark bonnet. She wore long, wide gowns with bulging sleeves, a shape that made me think of her as a walking mountain and a volcano at that. Indeed, she constantly erupted with lava-like judgments, advice, and instructions as to how my family should live our lives. All of which is to say that while my father and my mother raised me, their words were almost always prefaced by, "As your Aunt Lavinia suggests." One of Aunt Lavinia's judgments, which I was shocked to discover, was that my mother had lowered her station in life by marrying my father. Father was a man of middle age and modest height and quite portly. He had a round, smooth-shaved face and fair hair brushed with care. His soft pink hands, somewhat ink-stained, were what you'd expect of someone who wielded a pen and not a pickaxe. At home or at work, he attired himself in common gentleman's fashion: English frock coat, vest, knotted neckcloth, tan pants, and a tall silk black hat. He worked as an accountant for Pratt & Willingast, a respectable trading business, which had its offices on Peck Street in the middle of Providence. Significantly, it was a position secured for him by Aunt Lavinia's husband, a fact which she did not let father or mother forget. Still, after 10 years of service, father received a silver pocket watch in recognition of his good work. He liked to bring it out at regular intervals as to suggest he was a busy man. In fact, I came to understand it was displayed mostly to show Aunt Lavinia that he was worthy. But then, as I came to realize, father's highest ambition was to become acceptable to Aunt Lavinia, and he chose to do so by agreeing to all her advice and all her judgments. As for my mother, she had a kind-hearted, loving nature and looked after us all, trying her best to shield us from her sister's dictates. By way of personal occupation, other than supervising her children's upbringing and managing the household, she had her reading, popular romances such as The Betrothed, and her needlework to do. Yet while mother was a quiet soul, sometimes as I watched her sewing, it seemed as if she were frustrated with her life and used her needle to pierce the fabric of the world. Exasperated by my parents' constant deference to Aunt Lavinia, it was upon my youngest brother, Jacob, that I bestowed my deepest affections. More than anyone else, he was willing to listen to my endless prattle, and most of all, he didn't criticize me. We were as close as kin can be, and I enjoyed his company greatly. Jacob, 4 years younger than I, had a pleasing apple-cheek sweetness. An earnest, serious, almost solemn boy, he wasn't given to mischief. When he played with his school friends, he did so quietly and without much zest. He was fond of music and enjoyed whistling the popular songs of the day. That said, his whistling told me he was troubled. Whereas Jacob considered me hot-brained, he fretted far too much, and worry made him agitated. Jacob appeared to be the least bothered by how much our lives were governed by my aunt. But then, it was Jacob of whom Aunt Lavinia approved. She, who had no children of her own, once said, "Jacob is a perfect child. He is quiet and does what he is told. We should all encourage Victoria to be more like her brother." Once she informed me, "You should know, Victoria, that someday Jacob will be the head of the family, and you will need to defer to him." Young though I was much distressed, and replied, "Jacob shall have his life. I shall have mine." To which Aunt Lavinia scolded, "Nonsense! A girl's life should be solely dedicated to taking care of others." I'm sure that made me pout-mouthed. Because I resisted my aunt's dictates, she was particularly harsh on me, finding me too independent, too bold, and far too free with my opinions. But the truth is, there were few aspects of my life that did not come under her firm declarations. Victoria should dress this way. That meant, for example, I must never go outside without a gloves and a bonnet. Victoria should have proper acquaintances. This meant that the Mrs. Biggs were not suitable friends, whereas the Mrs. Colchester were, and I was never told the reasons. Victoria should be taking dancing lessons from Miss Coldbrett's Academy of Dancery, and I attended weekly. And to call Victoria Tory is vulgar. Once I was no more than 10, and she told me, "Unless you change your opinionated ways, you will not find a suitable man willing to marry you." My retort was, "I intend to remain self-governing." When Jacob turned 6, I was 10, he began to attend a school selected by my aunt, the Rhode Island Institute of Instruction in Providence. She further proclaimed it was sufficient for a girl to be educated at home, save Sunday church school. My parents did as she advised, and I did not go to school. Whereas Jacob went to school tamely, I objected to not going and did so strongly. Why, I argued, should I not get an education? Was I not the eldest child? Was I not quick-witted and eager? Father consulted his pocket watch and said, "We shall do what Aunt Lavinia advises." While I didn't go to school, my mother sympathized with me, and she took it upon herself to teach me to read and write, as she told me her mother had taught her. Additionally, I secretly persuaded Jacob to share all his school lessons with me, and that allowed me to be educated on my own, furtively. And the truth is, I surpassed him. I was therefore soon reading a great deal. Alas, the books in our home were too few, too limited. Having a desire for more knowledge, I took such small moneys as I had saved, birthday and Christmas gifts, and telling no one, walked downhill to the Providence Athenaeum, the city's fine library. But when I placed my sparse coins on the counter and informed the white-haired gentleman's secretary that I wished to purchase a membership, he told me I didn't have nearly enough. Disappointment must have clouded my face, and the secretary considered me with a kindly smile, paused a long moment, and then leaned down and whispered, "Since you're so young and eager, I'm going to give you a free subscription, but you mustn't tell anyone." I went from rejection to rapture. I borrowed books and I hid them in my private room, and at night while the house slept, I read voraciously by candlelight, and I learned that stealthy reading is absolutely sublime. Reading became my world. I discovered and consumed volumes by Mr. Poe, Mr. Dickens, and Miss Austen. Did I understand them all? Of course not. But then people do not generally grasp the true value of reading. It's not to learn about others, it's to learn about oneself. Thus, it was that I came upon the recently published autobiography of Jane Eyre. That book transformed my life. This book, Gold Rush Girl, will be a part of our year-long display here in the children's room. Reading is a window to the world, and I hope that you will come in and check it out.